They called it the Kostova Estate in the few remaining Soviet documents. Others called it the Quiet House, the Hollow Villa, or simply that place in the mountains. No roads led directly to it, no photographs of it exist from its prime years, and no one who lived inside ever returned. What happened in those halls between 1956 and 1968 was not a war crime. It was not a military experiment. It was officially nothing at all. But something did happen. In the dense woods of the Carpathian Mountains, the estate was nestled in isolation, far from towns, rail lines, or watchful eyes. It was a stone fortress with long corridors, sealed basements, and an interior design more suited to a facility than a home. It belonged to Dr. Andrei Kostova, a Soviet behavioral scientist who rose quietly through party ranks in the 1950s. His official biography cited neurological development studies and behavioral rehabilitation of trauma-affected minors. But all physical case files tied to his work were removed from Moscow archives after 1972. Only whispers remain. His facility admitted children under the label State Beneficiaries, Emotional Correction Cadre. Between 1956 and 1968, 17 children were recorded entering the estate. They arrived in unmarked vehicles late at night in groups of no more than 4. None were ever seen again. One surviving name is whispered, Sasha Kostova, supposedly the doctor's daughter, or perhaps a patient made to believe she was. The ambiguity remains because no photos, records, or birth documents exist under that name in any Soviet database. In 1968, a 14-year-old girl was found collapsed on the roadside 5 kilometers from the estate. One hand was burned, her feet were bare. She carried 3 torn, ink-stained pages. She could not state her name. She spoke one sentence, again and again. "He told me I was never me, authority." ICE collected the girl, labeled her dissociative, uncooperative. The papers were destroyed. She was placed in a government psychiatric unit. She vanished 3 days later. The estate burned that same week. The fire was never reported to local services. No emergency dispatch was ever made. Only one American satellite years later would record the smoldering ruin on a blurred reel labeled Unidentified Soviet Outpost No. 14. But strange fragments kept emerging. In 1992, a thesis was submitted to Sofia University titled Mnemonic Hollowing and Repetition-Based Mind Sculpting. The bibliography referenced an unusual file, MK-KOSTOVA, Hollow File 3C. The thesis was removed within a week. The student who submitted it was never seen again on campus. Security tapes showed her leaving with a box of documents at midnight, accompanied by 2 unidentified men. In 2004, a shortwave radio operator in Hungary picked up looping childlike voices on a forgotten frequency. "I remember you, but you don't remember me. I remember you, but you don't remember me." The signal came and went for months, always near the Romanian border. When triangulated, it pointed to the ruins of the Kostova Estate. Locals called that forest cursed. Animals refused to nest there. Hikers lost track of time. Some claimed to hear a piano playing from beneath the soil. Others swore they saw children watching from the trees, mouths moving silently. In 2009, a document titled Family Log, K-Iteration 17, was leaked on the dark web. It contained anatomical sketches mixed with musical notation, phrases like memory rerouting, and a recurring signature. Ivana Kostova, mother, memory keeper. No one knows who Ivana was. Some believe she was a nurse, others the true architect of the project, but her title, Memory Keeper, has since surfaced in other Cold War files. Across all of this, one idea repeats like static beneath the narrative. Children were not treated, they were rewritten. In scattered accounts, former Soviet archivists speak of files with names that change when reread, of diagrams labeled K-loop and silencing helm, of patient voices described as dulled like strings cut from the inside. What little we know through survivors of neighboring villages, and they only speak at night and only when drunk, of how the forest sometimes hums, and how the wind near the Kostova ruins seems to form words if you listen long enough. One phrase comes up again and again. The body forgets, but the walls remember. And the girl, the unnamed barefoot girl, the last thing she said before disappearing from her hospital bed. "I think he took her out of me. I don't know who I am anymore." He arrived in 1954 wearing a long wool coat and a hat too wide for his face. No press welcomed him. No speeches marked his presence. Only a file signed by the State Bureau of Psychological Reform and one cold sentence etched in the margins. Silence is the first symptom of obedience. Dr. Andrei Kostova was not a public man. He had few published papers, most redacted beyond readability. What existed was cryptic. Fragments of work on trauma-induced memory distortion, obedience training in wartime orphanages, and something he once called reconstructive behavioral architecture. In photos, he always stood at a slight angle, as though avoiding his own image. Students from his brief lectures at Warsaw Medical Institute remembered only his voice, soft, rhythmically flat, and hard to recall afterward. The estate he chose wasn't inherited. It was purchased. A crumbling Austro-Hungarian villa from the 1800s, abandoned since World War I, situated atop a wooded rise in the Carpathians. Locals said the land itself felt sick. Birds avoided it. Frost came earlier on that soil. But the party signed it over without hesitation. He arrived alone, but workers followed. Men with blank armbands, foreign accents, and silent eyes. They restored the structure. Quickly, but with odd changes. No mirrors in any room, soundproofing in halls and stairwells, basements expanded downward, deeper than the blueprints ever suggested. One villager claimed to have delivered lumber during the rebuild and noticed something strange. There were no bedrooms, just rows of narrow doorways and wires running through the walls like veins. A second delivery man went missing 3 weeks later. In public, Dr. Kostova referred to the facility as a therapeutic retreat for children displaced by war. But no children were ever seen leaving. Only black cars arrived, and always at night. Locals began to murmur. In the nearby village of Kryov, whispers started, of children crying without sound, of odd lights flickering from beneath the forest floor. Of one boy, no older than 10, spotted at a train station repeating numbers. 17, 17, 17, reset, 17. Inside the manor, 2 other figures moved silently beside Dr. Kostova. Ivana Kostova, the mother. She was never confirmed to be his wife, but she was always seen with him, tall, with pale hair and expressionless features. She was the one who led morning routines, carried keys on a red cord, and walked with a notepad instead of speaking. Some claim she invented the silencing chamber. Others say she was the first patient. Anton Varnek, the scribe, a former linguist with connections to the Ministry of Propaganda. Varnek arrived months after construction ended. He was quiet, but not unkind, always seen at the typewriter in a second-floor study. He never left that room. Windows were later found blacked out with ink. A survivor, one of the few villagers brave enough to hike near the estate, later said, "The place didn't look evil. It looked empty, not abandoned, just wrong, like it wasn't built to hold people." That same man would later gouge out his own ear and claim, "I had to stop the tone. It hums inside your memory." The locals' tolerance turned to fear, yet no one spoke out, not to the party, not to each other. Why? Some say there were bribes, others say threats. But one theory comes up again and again in recovered documents. The cost of silence is paid in echoes. A memo found in a private collection of Soviet files included a strange diagram, a house dissected like a body with organs labeled as rooms. At the bottom, K Model V1, human structure, memory reversal capable. Even state officials who visited for inspection were disturbed. One KGB officer's field notes were recovered in 1993. No clocks, no photos. Children smile, but not at you. They smile at nothing. By 1957, the village priest stopped ringing his church bell. He said the hills around the estate had started to return the sound, but out of order. And then children from the village began to go missing. 2 boys, 1 girl. No signs, No struggle. One child's jacket was found near the estate fence, folded neatly. Inside the pocket, a drawing of the house, but the windows were shaped like eyes. The priest left town soon after. Inside the walls of the Kostova Estate, obedience had a rhythm. One note played over and over until identity snapped. The villagers couldn't name it, but the mountain could. From the outside, the Kostova Estate looked like a sanatorium or perhaps a private school, but those who crossed the threshold said it felt wrong, like entering a place where time had no permission to pass. Everything inside was deliberate. High arching ceilings gave a false sense of openness. Windows were narrow slits, barely wide enough to let in a bird's cry. No reflective surfaces, no clocks, no personal belongings allowed. Children brought into the estate were first stripped of their names, their clothes were burned, their hair was cut short, regardless of gender. They were told repeatedly, "You are not your past, you are here to become." Each child was assigned a room with a number but no lock. The freedom was false. The halls themselves were constructed to disorient, sloped subtly downward, with doors spaced unevenly and walls padded not for safety but for silence. The wallpaper was gray and flesh-toned, alternating between shades of hospital linen and decayed parchment. In the main corridor, above every door, the same phrase was carved into stone. A clean mind is a hollow room. The treatment protocol began with what Dr. Kostova called Phase 1, echoing. A series of sessions where children were placed in soundproof chambers and asked the same question for hours. Who were you before? They were never expected to answer. The question itself was the answer, until their thoughts spiraled into self-erasure. After 7 days, the next phase began, the rewriting. Books were a crucial part of the process. Each child was given a copy of a familiar fairy tale or folk story, but the words had been altered. In some, the wolf saved Little Red. In others, the forest ate the girl and she thanked it. The stories changed week to week, subtly at first, until the children no longer trusted their memory of what they'd once read. Eventually, they stopped questioning anything at all. One boy, referred to in a recovered note as Subject D7, was obsessed with birds before arrival. After 2 months, he would not acknowledge feathers. By his 3rd month, he screamed when shown the sky. Some of the children began to speak in mirror language, sentences that sounded normal until recorded and played in reverse. I remember me. I remember me. I played backward. Empty is she. Empty is me. Caretakers, never more than 5 in number, wore gray uniforms with no buttons or laces. They moved silently and carried no flashlights. They navigated the halls without sound, as if the floor remembered their weight. Disobedient children were sent to the echo cell. There, music played that had no melody, just had rising and falling tones, punctuated by childlike breathing. One child entered for a single night. The next morning, she no longer recognized her own name. She referred to herself only as number before voice. During reward sessions, children were brought into a chapel-like room with pale yellow walls. They were asked to thank the silence. Those who didn't smile during the recitation were denied sleep. The journals once kept by staff have vanished, but fragments found in burned drawers describe a phenomenon called memory loop collapse. It occurred when a subject tried to remember a loved one too often and too intensely. Symptoms included nosebleeds, sudden muteness, and sleep paralysis where the eyes remained open. One note simply read, Subject F9 reported the same dream 3 nights in a row. The house stood over me, and every time I tried to leave, the door opened into yesterday. The building itself began to develop a rhythm. Taps would echo when no one moved. Rooms would heat or cool unpredictably. Doors would open and shut despite windless nights. One caretaker, whose name has never been recovered, etched the following phrase into the wall above the fireplace before vanishing. We did not build this place to heal them. We built it to erase them. By late 1960, the estate no longer required punishment. Most children obeyed without command. They smiled when asked to forget. They clapped when told their birthdays were dreams. The final phase was never officially named, but in every account that has surfaced since, one term repeats, hollowing. It began with sound. Before the injections, before the ink, before the chapel, every ritual started with a tone. At precisely 4:44 a.m., a frequency, barely audible to adults, would pulse through the estate. The children called it the hum beneath the pillow. Staff referred to it as the alignment tone. It was never spoken of aloud. What followed was the correction. Subjects were selected without pattern. Sometimes a boy who refused to eat, sometimes a girl who cried in her sleep. But most F10, it was the ones who asked too many questions. They were taken from their beds barefoot, escorted in silence to the lower wing. The halls down there were narrower. The wallpaper was dark blue and stitched with wires. The door they passed through bore no number, just a small symbol etched in chalk, a circle with 2 parallel lines through it. The children would not return for days, and when they did, they were different. In survivor reports, smuggled decades later to journalists and university researchers, fragments of these rituals began to take shape. The audio conditioning room was lined with padded walls and rusted speakers. Children were made to sit cross-legged in chairs bolted to the floor. They were asked only one thing: what sound lives in your silence? Then came hours of tonal programming. No melody, no speech, just overlapping frequencies. Some slow and deep, others sharp enough to crack fillings. One tone in particular, labeled K17 theta, was said to cause nausea, tears, and involuntary smiling. Those who resisted were taken to the ink room. No paper existed inside, only walls, covered in writings too small for human eyes. Tiny black-inked symbols like parasites, looping into each other until they resembled chains. A caretaker named Vasha, later identified through leaked personnel records, described his task in a forgotten memoir. They were told to trace the symbols, again and again, until their fingers bled, until they could see them in the dark. The ink we used, it wasn't normal. It stained dreams. It was here that Subject Y2, later believed to be Nadia Kostova, first resisted. She had been brought into the ink chamber for crying during a reward session. Instead of tracing the walls, she stared directly at the caregiver, her mouth unmoving. When she finally spoke, it wasn't her voice. This isn't correction, this is subtraction. She was taken to the chapel. This was no place of worship, no cross, no iconography, only smooth stone and a mirrorless altar beneath a dim skylight. The chapel was where the final reinforcement ritual occurred, called in records the re-seeing. Children stood alone in the center while a recording played. You're safe, you're seen, you're hollow. First whispered, then spoken, then screamed. Dozens of voices layered together like collapsing memories. Children were taught to repeat it over and over. If they hesitated, cold therapy was administered. Cold therapy was brutal. Icy water poured over the body in near darkness. Sometimes the water was laced with a thin black oil. One former maintenance worker claimed, the water wasn't for pain, it was to reset the voice inside. Most children stopped speaking altogether after their third correction, but those who didn't were taken to the reflection cell. The name was ironic. There were no mirrors, only a two-way speaker and a journal chained to the wall. Inside the journal were phrases like, "You are not her." "Today is the same as yesterday." "To forget is to obey." The entries changed depending on who entered the room. No two children saw the same pages, and some swore they didn't write what appeared in their own handwriting. One note, later torn from the book and hidden inside a child's pillowcase, read, "They say if you pretend long enough, the pretending becomes real. But what happens if you forget you were pretending?" By 1962, the correction ritual had evolved. It was no longer reserved for disobedience. It became a weekly routine, administered regardless of behavior, just to maintain the silence. Records note that by this stage, eye contact had become rare. Most children looked through you, or beyond you, or inward. And for those too fractured to continue, the final correction. This room has never been found, but stories say it existed below even the basement. It was round, lit only by candlelight, with a recording device always running, capturing the last words of every subject. From recovered transcriptions, one phrase appears again and again. "I feel lighter now, like I'm not even a person." They came back quietly. No one celebrated their return. No parades, no ceremonies. Just a knock on a farmhouse door, a pale child standing alone, a suitcase clutched in both hands like it weighed more than their memory. The first was Eliska Dvorak, age 12. Gone for 16 months, presumed dead. Her parents fell to their knees when they saw her, sobbing, whispering prayers. But Eliska said nothing. She ate when told. She slept exactly 7 hours per night. She smiled on command, but she did not play. She did not ask about her dog, her dolls, or her missing teeth. Her parents showed her photos of summer holidays, hiking trails, birthdays, her sister's violin recital. She stared blankly and asked, "Why are you showing me strangers?" Over the next year, 6 more children returned to various villages in the region. All behaved the same, obedient, orderly, emotionless. They performed basic chores without resistance. They nodded when spoken to. They sat for meals but never asked for seconds. One mother described her son's new behavior as peaceful but chilling, like watching someone mimic what they think a child should be. The most disturbing change was the laughter. They did laugh, but only once a day, exactly at dusk. Short, stiff bursts that stopped abruptly. When asked why, one boy answered, "That's when it echoes best." Doctors examined them and declared them well-adjusted. Psychologists praised the absence of trauma symptoms. One official even declared it a miraculous psychological advancement. But parents weren't convinced. They noticed other things, little things. Children no longer remembered songs they once sang or words to lullabies passed down generations. They covered their ears when hearing bells, trains, or birds. One girl screamed uncontrollably when her grandfather hummed. Fine incisions behind the ears. One child had strange circular markings on their palms, like ink blots burned into the flesh. Multiple parents reported finding their children sitting upright in bed at night, eyes wide open but unblinking. One boy whispered repeatedly, "It's still humming, it never stopped." Villagers whispered again. But now, the fear was inside their homes. Aunt Dasha, a caregiver for her niece who returned from the Kostova Estate, found a small drawing hidden in the child's coat lining. It showed a house with no roof, windows like eyes, and a family of stick figures beneath it. Each figure was hollow, circles where hearts should be. She asked who the people were. The child replied, "They're the ones who never left." Within a month, Aunt Dasha hung herself in the barn. The town held no funeral. By 1964, 9 returned children had re-entered society. Not one spoke of the estate. Not one mentioned the experiments. Not one remembered the other children. They were called the Blessed, a term created by state media, celebrating the power of rehabilitation and obedience. But privately, neighbors avoided them. Teachers said they learned too fast but remembered too little. Children wouldn't play with them. They said the returned ones didn't blink the right way. In one harrowing case, a family tried to send their child back, claimed the girl they'd received was not theirs, that she mimicked their daughter's voice but didn't recognize her own room. The state intervened. The parents were fined for emotional abuse. The child remained in the home. 3 years later, the mother was institutionalized for delusions. Her medical file contained a note, insists her daughter is a replacement, refers to her as the Hollow. As reports accumulated, one object kept reappearing, a red ribbon. Each of the returned children owned one, wore it in their hair, tied it to a coat button, or kept it in a pocket. When asked where it came from, answers were uniform. It was given during silence. By the late 1960s, no more children returned. Some say the estate shut down. Others say it simply ran out of names. But the red ribbon stayed, passed from child to child, sewn into coats, hidden in drawers. One teacher reportedly found 7 children in her class holding the same ribbon. When she asked why, they replied in unison, "It helps us remember to forget." Her name was Milena Petrova. She was 14 when she was taken. Unlike most children who arrived at the Kostova estate in whispers and confusion, Milena was removed from her home in broad daylight. Her mother screaming as soldiers held her back, her father frozen in silence. Her crime? She had written a letter to a banned journalist. The letter spoke of strange sounds at night. of cousins who vanished, of a building in the hills that was supposed to be abandoned but never dark. Milena didn't cry when they took her. She stared into the eyes of the officer and asked, "Is your daughter hollow yet?" That was her first act of defiance. It wouldn't be her last. She arrived at the estate and was immediately classified as R-level. Resistant. Records later showed that R-level subjects were considered high priority for full correction or permanent silencing. She was placed in room 11, the farthest from the others. No books, no voice contact, only a gray wall and a metal bed frame bolted to the ground. The first 2 weeks were pure silence, no light, no meals at regular intervals. She drank water from a pipe in the wall. Then came the ice therapy. She was stripped, bound, and soaked with ice water daily for 6 days. She lost 2 toenails. Her vision blurred, but she never screamed. Not once. When caregivers played the alignment tone, Milena covered her ears with her knees. When shown rewritten fairy tales, she rewrote them back, using ink, scraped from the black mold in her wall. One night, she recited entire pages from memory of a banned poetry book they had tried to erase from her mind. A page in the caretaker's journal read, "Subject M has memory retention incompatible with protocol. No signs of breakdown. Instead, observation." They changed tactics. She was subjected to reorientation, a cruel practice where caretakers would read false histories to her for hours, convincing her that her parents were dead, that her letters never existed, that she had been born inside the estate. Each time, Milena responded with a single phrase, "Your lie is too loud." They began starving her. For 9 days, she received only salted water and bread crust. Still, she watched, listened, learned. She observed mealtimes for the others by sound, counting footsteps beyond her door. She memorized hallway patterns by the way air moved through vents. She crafted ink from berries crushed beneath her shoe and wrote along the metal frame of her bed with sharpened nails. She wrote names, dates, methods. She discovered the term hollowing by overhearing 2 staff members at night. She wrote it again and again until her fingers bled. On her 43rd day, a storm hit the estate. Something shifted. Lights flickered, doors creaked. 2 caregivers failed to report for their shift. That night, Milena heard something new, a voice, not from a person, from the wall itself. "If you can still write, you can still run." She waited, planned. She noticed that every 4th shift, caretaker Vasha brought her food and always dropped his keys while opening the cell. On the 5th week, when the thunder masked the sound, she took the key. She carved a replica from bone fragments collected from her meal scraps. It took 4 days. On the 48th day, she escaped her room. What she saw broke her. Children in rows, asleep with their eyes open. One girl sitting in a bath of black liquid, smiling without breath. Rooms that looped into each other endlessly. A mirrorless hallway with doors that led back into themselves. She wrote nothing that night, but she memorized everything. She found a caretaker's ledger, stole it, hid it in her coat lining. When she reached the edge of the estate, the storm was gone, but inside her head, the alignment tone never stopped. She walked 11 kilometers to the nearest town. By dawn, she collapsed at a monastery's doorstep. When the monks found her, she whispered, "It's not correction, it's replacement." The monastery scribes didn't know what to make of her. Milena Petrova barely spoke. When she did, it was in short bursts, coded fragments, dates, and phrases that made no sense on their own. Room 11, blue corridor, ink that listens. Her body bore the marks of prolonged deprivation, fractured fingernails, bruises from restraints, swollen joints from cold therapy. But it was the inside of her coat that told the real story. Sewn into the inner lining were 21 pages of torn diagrams, maps, phrases in looping handwriting, and symbols traced in red ink. At the center was a hand-drawn crest, a house with no roof, and a child inside with no face. When asked where she had come from, she pointed to the hills and whispered, "Where children go quiet forever." The monks contacted the local university in Krakow, known for its underground interest in state experiments. A young anthropologist named Dr. Julik Strasny arrived within the week to investigate. Upon reviewing the diagrams, he recognized the term MK-Thorn protocol. It was rumored to be a memory reprogramming project, similar in structure to Cold War psychological conditioning done in North America, but rooted in symbolic disassociation instead of pharmaceuticals. Milena handed him the key she had carved. She said only, "It opens more than one thing." Within 2 days, Dr. Strasny organized a private field visit to the alleged estate. He took a small team, 2 researchers and a skeptical journalist. What they found stunned them. The manor appeared abandoned on the surface, but the deeper they moved inside, the more preserved the horror became. Rooms untouched, with notebooks still on desks, beds still made, dishes laid out for no one, walls covered in symbols, not written by hand, but stamped in exact precision. An operating room in the lower wing with a still-running tape machine, looping the phrase, "You're safe, you're seen, you're hollow." They discovered a false wall in the basement leading to a narrow spiral staircase. At the bottom, the final correction room. The air was colder, the stones smoother, candles melted down to the floor. They found 7 recording devices, each labeled with initials and a date. One tape played the following sentence, in a child's voice. "I can't remember my name, but I know it hurt." A locked cabinet revealed jars of preserved organic matter, fragments of teeth, nails, and in one case, a human tongue. Next to them, photographs, dozens of them. Children standing in line, some smiling, others wide-eyed, all wearing red ribbons. Worse still, tucked into a ledger beneath the table, state documents marked with the Kostova family seal. Signatures from Evgeny Kostova and Lydia Kostova, confirming the use of the estate for behavioral harmonization of deviant youth. The date? 1961. Signed and approved. Dr. Strasny leaked the findings. Within 48 hours, authorities raided the estate. But it was too late. The tapes were gone. So were the preserved remains. All doors were open, all documents removed, except for a single phrase etched into the chapel wall. They took the knowledge. They left the blood. The official investigation was brief and inconclusive. The Kostova family denied all involvement. They claimed the estate had been used for spiritual retreats and that rogue agents had commandeered the building without permission. But no one could explain how identical prescriptions and journal entries were found across 7 returned children, spanning multiple villages, all with the same handwriting and identical dates. Within weeks, the estate burned to the ground under unknown circumstances. Local authorities closed the case. But rumors persisted. A journalist investigating the raid vanished 6 months later. The university sealed all files related to the Kostova project. Milena Petrova disappeared. Her last known location was a train station in Brno. The monk who helped her was found dead 2 weeks later with a red ribbon clutched in his hand. Whispers spread of a voice heard in radio static at 4:44 a.m. Always the same line. Correction complete. Awaiting silence. Today, there are no signs the Kostova estate ever existed. The land it stood on, near the edge of the Moravian highlands, has been declared geologically unstable, fenced off, marked with a rusted sign that reads, "No trespassing, sinkhole risk." But locals know it wasn't the ground that gave way. It was the truth. In the years that followed the fire, every official record of the estate's purpose vanished. The Ministry of Health cited clerical errors. The Ministry of Education claimed the reform school was never licensed. The Kostova family name was quietly erased from business directories and civil registries. By the mid-1970s, any remaining survivor accounts were deemed inconclusive. Milena Petrova, missing. Dr. Julik Strasny, killed in a car accident 2 weeks before he was scheduled to speak in Geneva. Recovered children, scattered, sealed under state guardianship, their files inaccessible even today. One investigative journalist, Lucia Radek, spent 10 years tracing the children's lives. She published one article in a fringe journal. Title: The Hollow Protocol, What We Were Never Meant to Heal From. In it, she wrote, they weren't trying to fix these children, they were trying to erase who they were and replace them with something obedient, useful, and hoeing. 3 months after publication, Roddick was institutionalized following a public breakdown. Her notebooks were seized. Her home was cleared out by anonymous inspectors. She died in 1991, labeled as paranoid schizophrenic. No autopsy was ever released, but the story didn't end with suppression. It evolved. Fragments of Kostova research notes surfaced in university archives across Europe in the 1980s and 1990s, filed under different names. One labeled Auditory Harmonization via Trauma. Another, Identity Re-encoding in Minors. The eerie part? Despite different authors, the diagrams were identical to Melina's notes. Same symbols, same alignment maps, same repeated phrase in the margins. Quiet is loyalty. One document found in Leipzig had a footnote. Technique adapted from MK-KOSTOVA field trials. Not all research dies in fire. Some of it is repackaged, renamed, and reborn. As for the Kostova family, those who remained publicly visible reinvented themselves. Evgeny Kostova was listed as a consultant on educational reform in Czechoslovakia's later years. Lydia Kostova, once the estate matron, became a silent partner in a pharmaceutical firm that patented a drug used in early-stage memory therapy. Their descendants live across Europe and North America. One, a neurologist, gave a TED Talk on emotional clarity in childhood in 2012. He never mentioned his family. He wore a red ribbon on his wrist. When asked about it, he said, "It was given to me by someone who forgot me. The house itself is gone. No satellite image has ever captured its ruins. But every now and then, hikers report oddities near the restricted area, a humming sound that comes and goes in perfect intervals. Footprints that end mid-path, as if the person vanished. Voices on old radios, repeating names that don't exist anymore." And in 2007, a doctoral student researching Cold War psychology vanished while interviewing elderly villagers near the site. The only thing found was her notebook. On the final page, hastily written, "No one remembers Thasa," he screams, but the walls do. They called him Caretaker Alexei. He was never on official staff rosters, no uniform, no photo ID, but every child remembered the man with the cracked hands and distant eyes who always seemed to appear just before the worst things happened. He walked slowly, dragging his right foot slightly, carried no flashlight, never smiled. When spoken to, he gave short answers, except when asked about names. "Names are too loud," he'd whisper. "Better if they stay folded." Some of the children believed he had once been a patient. Others said he was born in the manor long before the first experiments. And one boy, whose name was erased from every document, once told a staff member, "Alexei doesn't blink when you scream. That's how I know he remembers." No one investigated further, but hidden in the western wing of the estate, behind a rusted boiler door, was his room. A cot, a crate of onions, and a wooden box filled with ledgers, small, cloth-bound notebooks. Each ledger had a name carved into the spine, not staff names, not officials, but children. The entries weren't orderly. They jumped across years, doubled back, skipped lines and dates. But they told a story far more disturbing than any treatment protocol. Ledger, MS, 1959. Said she couldn't see her own reflection anymore, not in water, not in glass. They gave her sugar to keep her calm. I gave her chalk. She wrote her name 700 times before it faded. Ledger, DL, 1960. He asked if he could keep the sound in a jar. They made him walk the quiet path 17 times. After that, he didn't ask for anything. Ledger, NK, 1961. Tried to sing. Voice would not rise. Told me her name used to be something else. Said her bones itched. Said her bed whispered. I marked her as pending. She's still not back. Some entries were addressed to himself. Others were scratched out, rewritten. or ended mid-sentence. But one thing was consistent. Every name he recorded had disappeared from the official system within 2 weeks. Some ledgers had a red string tied around them. Others were burned at the corners, deliberately. One had a metal plate riveted to the front with a single word carved in Cyrillic: Tishina, silence. In 1973, 2 weeks before the estate burned down, Alexei approached one of the night staff. She was new. She hadn't yet learned to ignore questions. He handed her a ledger and said, "If the door opens, don't follow. If the window calls, don't answer. And if you ever hear your name whispered in reverse, run." She never saw him again. The ledger he gave her was never turned in. She kept it until her death in 2004. When her son opened it, he found one final entry. Ledger, AV. I remember now. I remember being the boy who tried to forget. They said if I kept watching, I'd stop feeling. They were right. But I wrote this anyway, because someone should, because no one else will. Caretaker Alexei was never found. No record of his birth, employment, or disappearance exists. But a historian in Brno who collected Cold War relics claimed he once saw a page with Alexei's handwriting in a government archive. It wasn't a ledger this time. It was a blueprint for a door that never opened, with an annotation in red: "Door opens inward, memory escapes outward."